Good evening, and you're very welcome to Talking Timber. My name is Nuala Ní Lahartha, and I'm head of the Teagasc Forestry Development Department, and I'm your host for this evening. Our aim in this series of annual Talking Timber events is to support and empower forest owners in relation to thinning and harvesting your crops and getting the best from marketing their timber. For the next hour or so, my colleagues and I in Teagasc, along with the Forestry Division of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, a forest owner, a forestry consultant and a tax advisor, will discuss the issues around this year's Talking Timber event, the business of selling your timber. Please be aware this event is being recorded and will be available to view after the event. We are hoping to provide forest owners this evening with information to support them in their various decisions around selling their timber. Now, our focus this evening is on conifers. Please be aware we will be running events later in the year on broadleaf management and broadleaf harvesting, and we'll circulate information about them in due course. The format for this evening is short videos followed by studio discussion with our expert panel. We are live, and if you want to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can type in the question at any time, and we'll try to answer as many as possible in the Q&A section. So we are joined this evening on the expert panel by John Casey, Seppi Hona and Victor Barber. And to start with, I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves. Victor.
Evening everyone, my name is Victor Barber and I work as Harvesting Manager with Western Forestry Co-op. We organise and manage everything from felon licences, road licences, thinning, clear fells, CCF, replanting and maintenance on behalf of private owners.
Good evening everyone, I'm Seppi Hona. I'm a Regional Inspector with the Forest Service and the Department of Agriculture.
Good evening all, my name is John Casey. I'm a Teagasc Forestry Advisor based in Mallow and I cover Cork and Waterford.
We now go straight to our first video where we meet Tim Reddin, who's a forest owner, and he discusses his experiences in thinning and selling his timber crop.
My name is Tim Reddin. Myself and my wife inherited this forestry in 2002. It was planted by my mother-in-law in '97. She planted 20 hectares of conifer here, 20 of hardwood. So there's a good mix of hardwood and softwood. We didn't kind of know much about forestry in those days, but over the years, we've become to spend a lot more time down here. We've been through 3 thinnings at this stage, so it's we're a lot more hands-on now. The first thinning was interesting. We were really green, and we weren't very knowledgeable. My mother-in-law had been in a co-op group in Dungarvan, and they were still doing some management here. And they were advising us to look at thinning. So we got a few quotes from different companies, and we just kind of, it's like going to a builder, we just picked one and went with them. And really what appealed to us about that, being non-engaged in forestry, was they delivered us a full package. They said they would apply for the grants, do the roads, do the harvesting, sell the wood, and it was mostly cash neutral. I don't know if they measured the wood even at the time prior to thinning. We had no estimates. So, I think the first thinning was a really, really useful lesson on how not to go about it. So, in terms of the second and third thinning, I came across Irish wood producers on a Teagasc farm walk, and I asked them to come down here and have a look. And, they proposed a contract. Everything in the contract was very clear, and that appealed to me. The contract was based on estimates, but all of the costs were very clear up front. The stuff was measured prior to harvesting. If I'm selling cattle, I can go online, I can see what the current prices are, but there isn't that clarity to private owners to know what the day-to-day prices are of wood. I think I've learned a lot since the green days of that first thinning, and I learned a lot of it from the knowledge transfer group that was set up. One of the things there, I met other forest owners, and just meeting other people, going to their forest, the experience you get from them, it was very beneficial. And more importantly, sources of information. Teagasc, Covard, UK sites, there's lots of stuff available online. That was very helpful. One thing I would like to see is more streamlining of the licensing issue. that it's not all these separate processes, one after another, and you can be held up for a long time. I was held up for 14 months on this thinning. So yes, I'm really looking forward to Clearfell. As you can see, this is quite a productive forest, and it's great to see it happen in one's lifetime, and I'm very proud of my mother-in-law for planting this. We will go with conifers again. We already have 50% coverage here in hardwood, and that'll be nice to see that happen again here.
Well, I think you'll agree that Tim's is a very interesting case study, and his comments about the knowledge he gained from the experience of listening to other forest owners and from getting good advice are well worth taking on board. So we'll get straight down and we'll start with the basics, John. Can you briefly explain what is thinning and why it should be carried out?
Okay, so thinning is essentially removing a proportion of the crop, either as part of a clearfell system or continuous cover forestry. If it's clearfell, you're probably looking at 2 or 3 thinnings, and then the clearfell continuous cover forestry, it might be intermittently for quite a considerable amount of time. What you're essentially doing is you're providing space for the healthier, stronger, better quality trees to grow and to put on volume. Volume will eventually become sawlog, which is obviously more valuable than pulp or pallet. So you're trying to increase the value of your crop itself. So in practically all cases, you're certainly going to make more revenue from a thin crop than a non-thin crop. Added benefits could also be, of course, that as you thin, you're increasing the biodiversity component of the crop as well.
And just looking at Tim's video there, he commented on how his approach to his second thinning would have been quite different to his approach to his first thinning. What lessons could a forest owner take from his experiences?
Certainly, I think one of the biggest lessons is you need to measure your crop. You need to understand what you have and what you're selling. You need to quantify it. If you can't quantify it, you can't put it on the market. And that would be the number one thing I would say. To have a management plan, have inspection paths, have some thought put into it before you start thinning. And understand, again, what it is you're actually trying to sell.
Okay, and following on from that, Victor, Tim expressed some concern there about a lack of clarity around timber prices for owners like himself. Do you have any advice for someone who's looking at prices?
Yeah, absolutely. I could understand why it's difficult for the likes of Tim to find out timber prices without making umpteen phone calls to different places to find out the current price of timber. I suppose there is a couple of options there. Wood price quarterly is one, WPQ it's referred to, and it was developed by the forestry section in UCD under Professor Anya Nguyen, which is there for people to view, and it basically gathers information from the private sector and puts the timber prices up for the public to view. So it gives you an idea of what the timber prices are. Now on top of that, to get current timber prices, I suppose I'd encourage owners to stay in touch with the forester, and it's a good way. A forester sells timber every day, every week of the year, compared to a forest owner who maybe sells timber once, twice, 3 times in their lifetime. So it's very difficult to keep a hand on the market and where it's at. So it's just communication and stay in touch with your forester as much as possible. And there are other organisations as well, like the IFA and the ITGA, that would print quarterly prices and monthly prices as well. So it's just trying to keep as many communication lines open as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And knowledge is power, I suppose.
It is indeed.
Yeah. And then, Seppi, moving on to you there, there's a lot of discussion, as we all see in the media at the moment, about getting felling licences and roading licences. What is the current situation in relation to forestry licences?
Yeah, so thanks, Neil. So the current situation is, so we're dealing with approximately 1,100 felling licences that we would consider in the ecology backlog, and about 190 road licences. So what we're currently doing, we're working over the last few months on a few system changes, making refinements to how we carry out the appropriate assessment procedure and how we run it through the system, to produce documents for the ecology team to review and to produce a final output. So for the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll be focusing on felling licences, after which we'll carry out a review of where we are. And we're hoping to, as we've seen over the last few weeks, we've made some significant gains in licence outputs, and we're hoping to and continue to build on that. And I can assure people that my colleagues are working tirelessly to increase output and to get through that backlog so people can get to the business of harvesting and managing their forests,
Okay, and Seppi, I see a question in here early, probably appropriately for you. How long does a clearfell licence last? And again, a follow on from that, how soon after clearfell can you actually plant?
Well, I suppose that depends on the number of years your licence is approved for. So usually if you apply for a felling licence, you have to define when you're planning to harvest the crop. So if you're planning to harvest the crop in 2021 and your licence ends in 2021, you can do your clearfell in 2021. Now, it's up to the owner. Usually within a year or two is advisable, within the terms of the licence. But it's advisable to plant within a year, usually, I think, when the site is still fresh.
Mm. And I suppose with timber prices being good at the moment, it's a nice time to be at the clearfell stage.
Yeah, and I think
course.
it's good too when you have, and I think Victor will probably attest to that, like when you have the income from the timber, it's always good, reinvest it straight away and get your replanting done, get the site replanted when it's hot, as they call it, and at least then the money doesn't go any other place and it's reinvested into the site, and you can assure it's replanted.
Okay, and then John, moving on to you there, in the video earlier on there, Tim mentioned he found his local forestry knowledge transfer group very good. What is a knowledge transfer group?
Okay, so the knowledge transfer groups were started in 2019. It's essentially peer-to-peer learning by forest owners. So it's similar to the beef, sheep, dairy knowledge groups that are there already. The idea is that owners themselves will learn from their own experiences and other people's experiences. There's a lot of knowledge to be had there. There's no point in learning other people's, learning mistakes over and over again. Why not learn from somebody else's? So these groups are facilitated by a professional forester, and there's 7 meetings. So there might be a combination of indoor and outdoor. And in fact, there's a payment of €70 per meeting for those participants. It's a very good way of getting knowledge, learning what you're growing, how you're growing it, and the stages you need to get in place in time. And a lot of it is forward planning. So it is excellent, I'd have to say.
And it's a DAFM funded initiative as well.
Yes, it's supported by the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine.
So one that we'd encourage people if they have the opportunity to get involved in.
Absolutely, like having been involved in those, it really brings forest owners out of themselves and they really feel comfortable when they're along with like-minded people,
Peer-to-peer learning, as they say.
Exactly, and they get a chance to mix with like-minded people.
Of course, yeah. And Victor, while we have you there, as a forester, when you were asked to prepare a plantation for thinning, can you give us an outline maybe of the kind of steps you take and what are the expected lead-in times?
Yeah, as early as possible. Any time from year 12 onwards, you need to start thinking about your thinning and your forest road. So you can put in an application for your license, your thinning license and your road at the same time. It does take quite a while. You can expect to take anything from 6 months onwards, maybe up to 2 years for that license to come through. So starting plenty of time that you're not in any panic and there's no rush. When you get your licenses, then you can make the decision when you want to put the road in. Definitely advised to put in the road as soon as possible. History will show that the most time you have wind blowing a site is when the forest road is put in too late and it just opens that forest up a little bit too much. So then there's a couple of starting points and then the decision is back to yourself when you thin it, depending on your species and different contributing factors when you decide to thin it.
So the moral of the story is start in good time.
Plenty of time.
And thinning should be no surprise to you. You should know that it's coming down the road.
Exactly.
There's a few questions in here now. Seppi, question is again following on, is there a grant to replant? And if not, why not? And a follow on again, will there be premium in the future? And I presume what they mean by that is there premium being paid on the second rotation?
Well, so currently there is an opportunity under the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme if the site is in a designated area, if it's adjoining a designated area or it's connected in some way to an EU or a national designation, there is an opportunity to apply for grant aid to replant only with a specific native woodland mixture. And there is funding for that, but there is no, other than that, there is no current funding or grant aid for replanting. And I suppose the argument, that would be made is, with current good timber prices being so especially clear fells, the revenue is quite lucrative, and I suppose the amount of money it costs actually to replant is a small percentage really in comparison to the profits made. So that would be one of the arguments I suppose that's made.
Okay, and I suppose a question that might be appropriate for Victor here. Patrick has asked, what's the difference in value between a thinned and non-thinned forest?
Every site is different, so there is no one answer that's going to be able to answer that question. Personally, thinning is absolutely desirable and will add value to your crop, but it is not essential, is what I would stress. And some sites just aren't suitable for thinning for various reasons. Maybe it was left too late, maybe it's a small site, things like that. But there's no way you can define that in one single answer. But even a non-thinned crop today with timber prices where they are, extremely good returns. I would not look negatively on it at all. If your plantation has gone past thinning, it's not a huge negative. It still will be worth very good money. It still will come into very good timber. You might have more smaller trees, so you'll have a lesser average tree size, but still a very, very saleable product. So still a lot of positives there.
Okay, and we've just time for one last question for you, Seppi. Tim mentioned in the video he'd like to see a streamlining of the forestry licensing system. So instead of separately licensed activities along the way, that there might just be a single license. Has DAFM considered what seems to be quite a pragmatic suggestion?
Yeah, it certainly is a logical suggestion and something that that has been currently being considered in DAFM. Looking at the pros and cons and the legislative requirements, so it has been considered at the minute, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. So now we move on to our next video. Here we actually meet Victor Barber in the forest itself, where he discusses the different ways that you can sell timber and also the steps involved in preparing a site for thinning.
My name is Victor Barber and I work as Harvesting Manager with Western Forestry Co-op. In Ireland today, there are three main methods of selling timber that is used today. A standing sale is where the owner and the purchaser agrees a price per tonne on the standing trees that will be weighed across a weighbridge, and you are paid on that basis. There's two methods of this. You can agree on an average price. So for every product that you have, your pulp, your stake, your pallet and your sawlog will be agreed at an average price across the board for every tonne that goes across the weighbridge. And that's a standing sale at an average price. The other option on a standing sale is to do a product category price. So you will be paid a separate price per tonne per each category. So you will have a separate price for your pulp, you will have a separate price for your stake and pallet and sawlog. And that could range today anything from €15 a tonne to €90 a tonne for your sawlog. So that's your standing sale. Your roadside sale is where your harvest manager organises the harvesting of the timber and presents it on roadside and sells it to each individual mill on roadside. So it's an agreed price where the timber is presented roadside. And then it's up to the mill then to haul it into the mill. The third option then is your delivered in sale. So this is where the harvest manager takes it a step further and organises the harvesting of the timber, the haulage of the timber, and delivers each product into each individual mill. We would advise forest owners to start thinking about doing a first thinning as soon as possible. Anytime after year 12 is a good time to consider looking about getting your felon licence and your road licence in place. This is going to take probably up to 2 years to get in place. So if you want to be ready to start thinning at year 15, you're going to have to be thinking that far in advance. The one capital investment that you're going to make, and it's just try and invest that bit into it to have a proper road infrastructure in place. The one biggest takeaway message is the importance of getting a pre-sales measurement or inventory done on your forest crop. Without knowing what volume of standing timber you have on your site, it is impossible to make informed decisions for your future. Very important to have your timber sale agreement between the forest owner and the purchaser. This outlines the most important points of your sale, the legal responsibilities, the environmental responsibilities and the health and safety responsibilities. It also outlines the prices, the payment terms, and the harvest timelines involved in sale. When you expect to start the site and when you expect to finish the site and when payment is considered due. Supervision is key to the process running smoothly. Leave anything to chance in this life and it probably will not go according to plan. So the more you can supervise, and I would encourage all forest owners, to get interested, get involved in the sale of your site, even if you employ someone like ourselves to manage, to become the harvest manager of your site. We would still encourage you to come out to the site, to get to know what you're selling, what you have, and the way it works. It's an interesting system, and you will gain knowledge from it, and it will give you the peace of mind of what's happening on your site is proper and right, and that you're getting paid correctly for the product that you are supplying.
So lots of really useful information there from Victor, and he clearly outlines the importance of preparing for thinning and the various options available. And bear in mind that Victor is going to be leaving us after this section, so if you have any questions for Victor, now would be a good time to get them in. So we'll start off, Victor, by asking you, when you talked in the video about the pre-sales inventory, what kind of detail are you talking about there?
So getting an inventory on your forest is basically going out into your forest, taking random sample plots through it and measuring the top height and DBH. So you can go back and calculate the amount of standing timber that you have in your site. Without that information, you have no knowledge what you're selling. You need to know the standing volume of your crop. If we were doing it on behalf of a customer, I suppose we'd take that probably a stage further and we'd stratify the crop and digitize out the common thing that owners would come to us is I have 20 acres for sale. But in a lot of cases, when you actually look at it closely, there might be 2 or 3 acres underneath an ESB line or something like that, or an acre of oak in the corner, which we're not including in the sale. So that might come back down to 14 or 15 acres, but that is all part of the inventory to figure out exactly what you have for sale, and it can't be understated the importance of knowing what you have for sale. Otherwise, you're just guesstimating. Yeah. Okay,
and again then, say you showed the different ways of selling timber there. Does the owner's responsibility vary with the type of sales method? For example, where an owner is directly involved in the sale?
It does. There is multiple ways of selling timber in Ireland, as outlined in the video. And there comes a responsibility with each different method. So if the owner wants to get hands-on and take on the management of the sale, they become the Forest Works manager. And in that comes responsibility, health and safety, environmental and workers' liabilities, all that. So that responsibility firmly stays with the owner if they want to manage the sale themselves. If on the other hand, if they want to get a company or a forester in on their behalf, that responsibility usually shifts over to the forester or forest company. I suppose ultimately that detail should be defined in the contract and clearly laid out where that responsibility lies. A contract is something that owners sometimes look at it wearily when we present it to them, but it's there for the owner's benefit more than ours. It lays out exactly where the responsibilities are and who is to look after them.
So important for owners to decide what level of responsibility they're willing to take on before they decide which way to go.
And to know what level of responsibility they're actually taking on by taking on that role. Innocence is no excuse if something goes wrong.
Right, okay. And Seppi, so we spoke there about the forest felling licence application. What level of detail would you recommend should go into that?
Yeah, so a few key messages, I suppose, Nuala. Like, first of all, when you're applying for your felling licence and you're filling out your application form, what we would always recommend, use the 10-year window that you have to apply for all your felling interventions. At times we would get an application for a felling licence where there's only one thinning intervention, say in 2022. Use the 10-year window, put in, sit down with your forester or carry out your inventory, as Victor said, look at what your forest, how it's grown, what it can produce, and put all those harvesting interventions into your felling applications or your felling application. Secondly, a harvest plan. We need a good harvest plan in order for us to assess the application, its impact on the environment. It needs to, there are some key features like water crossings, stacking areas, your access point. How do you plan to access the forest? Is it via private lane? Is it the public road? Are there any water course crossings proposed? Where are they? Where are you going to put in your silt control measures? As much detail as possible, because the more detail we have, it makes it easier for us to process the license in a more efficient manner. And if it has to go to ecology, for example, they have all that information there and they don't have to go back to the applicant and look for that information, which adds to the time that it takes them to work through the file. So they're the main take-home messages in relation to felling license applications.
Okay, so in that case, a lot of forest owners are considering whether they should include an NIS or a Natura impact statement in their application. I mean, there's a lot of cost involved here. Should they include it?
Yeah, so another message this evening is, if you're not asked for it, don't send it in. So what we're saying to people now is, send in your application as I've outlined. Put in as much detail as possible, your harvest plan, a good harvest plan, a reforestation map. If you're planning to clear, fell and replant, come in with a reforestation map, a biomap that shows all the environmental features at the reforest stage. Send it in. If we deem it necessary that an NIS is required, we'll request it. But what we're saying to people is, don't send one in, just don't go to the expense now, because in a lot of cases what we found is they're not even needed in some cases, and in other cases maybe if we come back and request the NIS, it might be for a very specific reason, and it might narrow down the scope of the NIS too. So unless you're asked for it, don't do it. That's the message this evening in relation to NISs.
And just then following through on the NISs, say you do require an NIS, but the owner is saying this costs a lot of money and I just can't afford to do it and I don't want to do it. What is the implication for that person? Will they get a licence at all? Or
well, in some cases, as part of the appropriate assessment procedure, you have to, at some stage, we may need to request an NIS if there's a deficiency in information coming to us, for example, that we can't deal with internally. There will still be some cases where an NIS will be required, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And John, then moving on to you there, so what would be the starting point for a forest owner, say, who's interested in selling their timber listening in here tonight? Where would you advise them to start?
I probably would suggest a forest management plan would be the first thing. Again, both Victor and Seppi mentioned this in terms of having a plan, having a roadmap, where you're going, what is the timeline. So if you're thinking about harvesting or you're thinking about putting in a road, starting preparing that ground a couple of years beforehand. Forest management plan normally goes in at about 12 years of age, so you're going to assess what the species are, what the growth rate, what the height is, the estimated thinning, how many thinnings, and perhaps the harvesting. This should be drawn up by a professional forester under sustainable forest management guidelines. But what it really is it's a roadmap for where you're going. First of all, quantify what you have. That is the number one thing that I would suggest. Is before you start anything at all, what do I actually have? What stage is it really at? And there is advice there. There's advice from Teagasc. There's advice from professional foresters. So it's not something that forest owners feel that they're going to have to come up with themselves. There is advice out there for them.
Okay, I think that's very useful. Victor, there's a question in here from Luke, and he's asking about replanting a year after clear fell, and he's asking about the pine weevil and what measures are available to control the pine weevil.
So look at, in our experience, get in as soon as possible and replant the following winter, spring after harvesting as soon as possible. There's a couple of benefits from that, in that one, the pine weevil really don't hit their peak for until 18 months after it's harvested, and vegetation as well. If you replant as soon as possible, the vegetation takes a while to come back, so there's less maintenance as far as a weeds point of view is concerned. There is no set program for pine weevil. Every site again is different, and there's different factors that cause a population of pine weevil to be high or to be low, and it is site specific. So sometimes outlying sites are lower risk, and you have less numbers, and you may get away with very, very little maintenance as far as weevil, but that's no guarantee. But as a general rule of thumb, big blocks of forestry, we're surrounded by more forestry, you're probably going to have a higher risk of pine weevil there, so you will have to put some measures in place to treat the pine weevil. let that be that the trees come treated from the nursery, or whether you put in a spraying program in place for the second year to control them.
And you need to keep an eye on it, of course, yeah.
Monitor more. There's nothing, I suppose we try and encourage owners to get it to treat it the same as any farm crop. Like if it's grain or barley or livestock, you'd be out checking it daily, weekly, and it's not just good enough to close the gate and walk away, because you will run into problems if you do. You have to get into the monitoring attitude and look at it at least weekly in the peak periods, which are April, May, August, September are the peak periods for hatches of pine weevil.
Okay, and John, we have a new publication out. Do you want to mention it?
Yes,
there?
I was just going to add to what Victor was saying in terms of there's a Teagasc publication on weevil control, and it goes through how to make that assessment. How do you monitor? When do you monitor? How do you assess what the population is, and when or whether you need to take action? So it's very good information. It goes through the life cycle of the weevil itself, and it gives an indication of the control methods that should be used as well. It's available on our website, and I think there's a published leaflet as well.
Okay, thanks for that. And Victor, just a last question for you there, but a very important one, obviously. Timber is a valuable crop, and following harvesting and extraction from the forest, it can often be left on the roadside and often in quite remote areas. What means of timber security and traceability can you have? I mean, I'm looking here at things like cameras, dockets.
Yeah, so ideally, if you have timber for sale, I'd really like to have a lockable barrier or a lockable gate of some type at your entrance to your forestry as a minimum. Normally, if that's not in place, we would go as far as putting up something temporary, because it's very important to have that there. On top of that, then you have your standard docket system, which is great. There is online methods of the docket system, but the paper docket system works really well, and it gives transparency for the owner, and they can visibly see that. You have the text message system, and you have cameras. And personally, the one that I really like is have contractors in place that you trust, harvesting and forwarding contractors and haulage contractors that you really trust to do the job, and they're your eyes and ears on the ground 24/7 every day of the week that they're there, which is invaluable. So they're just some of the measures that you can use.
Thanks for that. And at this stage, I'd like to thank Victor for his valuable contributions, and I think what you will agree are very insightful answers to questions. Victor will be leaving us at this stage, and we'll be joined by Declan McEvoy from IFAC, the Farm Accountancy and Taxation Company. But maybe before we meet Declan in studio, we're going to see him in the forest, where he discusses some important taxation issues and the implications around options for selling timber.
Declan McEvoy, Head of Tax with IFAC. Standing timber is exempt from income tax, but PRSI is at 4%, and USC, the average rate is 7%, but it gradiates up to 11%. On a roadside sale, value has increased, but one must remember, first of all, that when value has increased, cost has increased. So one is liable to tax on the profit being the value of the timber at the road minus the costs of getting it to roadside. The profit is not liable to income tax, but is liable to PRSI and universal social charge. A millgate sale is an increase in value again, because there's more processing done and more handling done to the timber. One is liable to PRSI and universal social charge on that profit. The profit being the amount that one has left after whatever contracting charges you have, whatever haulage charges you have. As an unregistered person, when one is selling timber, one is eligible to get added to the price of the timber the 5.6% flat rate addition. So if you agree a price with the merchant or the buyer, remember to get the flat rate added to that price. What is the flat rate? The flat rate is to compensate you for the VAT that you have incurred on costs that you would have had. Let it be harvesting, let it be transport, let it be any other costs on the felling of that timber and that forest. Where you're registered for VAT, you get the benefit of being able to claim the VAT back that you have been charged by the contractor on felling, transport, any other cost that you may have had. But the disadvantage is the price you get is the price you take, because there's no VAT added on. Timber is deemed to be a zero VAT event when you're selling it on for further processing. One should always seek advice early in the day. It's too late when the money is landed in the bank account or one has signed a contract.
So that was a very useful summary from Declan of the various tax and VAT implications in different situations, and some very useful tips there at the end about planning in advance in relation to tax issues. So do remember, if you want to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can type in a question at any time and we'll try to get through as many as we can this evening. So Declan, and you're very welcome. Can you clarify in relation to selling at millgate or delivered in, what taxes are applicable and if the profits are reckonable for income tax?
Income tax is a very wide definition because we define income tax as including PRSI and universal social charge. So it needs to be broken down into the three components. There's no income tax provided the forest has been managed on a commercial basis all along. Secondly, there is PRSI if you're under 65 years of age at 4%, and there's universal social charge then, which varies from roughly 7 to 11%. So you could, if you're under 65 years of age, you could have a 15% liability on the profits from the clear fell. So there is a significant enough liability, even though the message gets out there that it's income tax free.
Okay, so it's the PAYE type tax that isn't payable really?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the PRSI and the universal social charge.
Okay, right. And there's another tax that we hear about, the relevant contracts tax. What does that mean for forest owners?
For the vast majority of forest owners, it's irrelevant to them because it's the contractor, the principal contractor coming in that has the liability for it. The principal contractor will probably be subcontracting some of the work out, and it's a mechanism to ensure that the subcontractors are actually tax compliant. So for the forest owner, the farmer who has the forest, there is little or no impact for him.
Okay, right, okay. Now John, moving on there, Victor mentioned earlier on there about the importance of having a strong timber sales agreement. What would you consider to be the key elements in such an agreement?
I think there's probably 4 key elements. It has to be simple, it has to be understood. It has to be fair, or reasonably fair to both parties, okay? I suppose it has to be explicit. It has to be clear exactly what's in the contract, whose responsibility, how it's going to work, okay? And lastly, it has to be enforceable, okay? So those are really the 4 elements. Within that itself then, it should outline who has duties, who has responsibilities, and look at, for example, payments. How are payments going to be structured? Is there going to be a deposit? Are there going to be installments? Is there going to be a lump sum at the end? Now, I would say that certainly if you're looking at high value clear fells, you should be looking at installments rather than a lump sum at the end. You should have stage payments, would be my advice at that stage. So I would say Irish Timber Growers Association have a very good template, and it was one that we'd be happy to say, we're quite happy to endorse it as well.
And just a few questions here around clear felling. I might start with Seppi. Is there an opportunity following clear fell to change the type of woodland or forest that an owner has, for example, by changing the species?
Yeah, so that's an option that they can consider when they're applying for their felling licence, first of all. So they can opt, for example, a change from conifer to broadleaf. They can do that at their own expense, or if the site, for example, is in a sensitive water catchment or within or adjoining a Natura site or a national designation, there is at times an option to go for funding under the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme. So there are various options there, and under the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme, if they are converting a conifer high forest to a native woodland scheme, there is grant aid that will pay towards the reforesting that site with a specific mix of native species.
Okay, and I see a question in here from Jerry, and he's asking, is replanting a legal requirement, and what laws or rules relate to any requirement to replant? Well,
the 2014 Forestry Act requires a forest owner to replant after the site is clear felled, or they can apply and replant an alternative area. But the basis of the Act is that a forest needs to be replanted once it's cleared.
So it must be done.
It must be done, yeah.
Yeah, and Declan, in relation to clear felling and replanting again, is there a tax efficiency argument to be made in relation to replanting in the same year as clear felling?
Well, replanting is a cost, and any costs are allowable against the clear fell profit. So to reduce the profit, the cost of replanting makes sense to do it in the year instead of waiting till a year afterwards. So do it immediately.
So basically then all the costs involved with replanting, you can take it from your profits before you're reckonable for
Correct.
your universal social charge and PRSI. So there could be
a significant reduction. You know,
Yeah.
it's anywhere between 11 and 15% of a saving, you know, in tax on it.
Yeah, and again, another question here. You told us that owners who were not registered for VAT in the video earlier on can charge a flat rate of VAT on the agreed timber price. How do they go about doing that?
It's a very simple process. The flat rate addition for unregistered people, forestry is regarded as farming. Farming can get a flat rate addition of 5.6% from the 1st of January this year. It's to compensate them for not being able to incur or reclaim the VAT on the expenses they've had on clear felling. So all it is, it's to agree the price, and the price they agree is plus VAT. So if they agree €100,000, it's 100,000 plus the 5.6%. It's a simple addition onto the invoice. The mill or whoever they're selling it to, it's an expense for them, they can claim it back. So it's not costing the mill any money. The difference is if it's 100,000 plus VAT, which is 105,600, or 100,000 including VAT, is roughly 95,000. There's 10,000 of a difference, you know, per 100,000. Significant amount of money to leave behind you.
Absolutely, and something that you need to know about and have written into your contract. Just one last question here, maybe in relation to wealth transfer, and here we're looking at an example, maybe moving a forest from between generations in a family. Timber prices obviously are quite good at the moment. When is a good time to transfer a forest? Is it before or after harvest, or does it have any implication?
It's easier to transfer it from a tax point of view before harvest, because at that stage then the child is not having to meet many requirements. It's much simpler from a tax point of view, you know, beforehand. Afterwards, there's planning can still be done, but it becomes much more complex. So in simple terms, beforehand is the best time to transfer it.
Right, okay, and then just one last question here for Declan again, in relation to tax planning. Do different ownership types have an income tax implication? And I suppose here they're looking at maybe a joint partnership arrangement. Has that any implications for the taxation?
From an income tax point of view, it's back to each individual circumstances. You know, whether their age, whether they're liable to PRSI or not, whether the rate of universal social charge they're liable to. So that's the first tax. VAT would be on the total value, you know, the flat rate goes on to it. And capital taxes, transfer taxes, would depend on each person's individual circumstances. Joint ownership, partnership, and that can be complex legal areas that proper legal and professional advice is needed for.
Okay, thanks for that. Now we're moving on to our Q&A section, and thanks to those of you who have asked questions. Lots of questions have come in, and some of them are quite similar, so we'll try and group them together for efficiency and just try to get through as many of them as possible. And again, we'll just get them to the panel and maybe just keep the answers, fairly short anyway, if you don't mind. We'll start off here, and maybe a question for John. After the thinning operation, what kind of aftercare or maintenance should be carried out in a thinned site?
I would say that one of the biggest things, and should be part of your contract, is how the site is left afterwards in terms of the lockman top, where it's deposited, whether the drains are left unblocked, whether the site is left in a better situation or as good a situation it was found in. So if you have a lot of branching and the drains are blocked, you need to have them unblocked beforehand, otherwise it leads to site instability and increases the risk of windrow later on. So that would be one of the major issues, I think, with. The other thing, I suppose, was if you are doing thinning as well, I think that the stumps is a requirement to treat the stumps with urea to prevent fungal infection or limit fungal infection. And it's generally a condition of the felling licence.
Okay, thanks for that, John. Declan, I see a question in here for you. Does a VAT registered company have to pay PRSI and USC?
No, the VAT registered company, USC, is on personal income. So it would only be on wages or salaries that are paid out would it have to pay VAT, or would it have to pay PRSI and USC. It doesn't have to pay PRSI or USC on profits it makes.
Okay, right, thanks for that. And there's a lot of questions coming in relation to carbon credits. I know it's maybe not necessarily to do with selling timber, but John, what is the current situation, and is there any potential of people getting paid for their carbon in the forests?
Okay, so at the moment, yes, it is very topical. It comes up in conversations all the time, I find. But there is no system in place at the moment in Ireland in terms of carbon credits or carbon sales. Now, there are some voluntary schemes there, and there are some initiatives starting. For example, you have the Woodland Environmental Fund during afforestation, that a company may be associated with new planting of native woodland scheme, and there could be a payment accruing to that. But there is no carbon credit system as such in place. I suppose one of the other things is the ownership of the carbon credits is likely to be contested in some cases as well, between the state, which has grant aided and provided premiums for some forestry, and then the owners who own the land and the trees. The last thing I would say is Teagasc has an online forest carbon tool which allows you to calculate the potential carbon sequestered depending on the different species you plant and different systems. However, it is important to say that it's not usable for carbon trading, or it can't be used for carbon trading calculations.
Okay, thanks for that, John. I think that's an important point to make. It's a very useful tool for people just to see potentially what carbon they're sequestering, but as you say, not appropriate for trading. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thanks for that, John. Seppi, we're getting a lot of questions in relation to delays in felling licences, and how long are people expected to wait, and is it 2 years? Will they be told how long before they will get their licences, or is there any clarity around that, or can you provide a bit of additional information in relation to that?
Yeah, I suppose first of all, we acknowledge that there's been delays, and we're certainly not at the stage from a licensing point of view where we'd like to be. But as I said previously, we're working tirelessly to implement new systems. We've taken on additional resources in ecology. We've external ecology resources working for us very hard, may I add to get licenses through the appropriate assessment procedure, and for them to be legally robust and stand up to scrutiny. That's the key message here. So it's difficult for me to say, well, how long will we get through it? How long will we get through the backlog? We're working, as I said, very hard. We've set ourselves targets, and we're working, as I said, hard to meet those targets and beyond. Hopefully, but hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel.
And when the licence does come, will it cover both thinning and clear fell?
Well, that depends on what the applicant has put on their felling licence. Going back to what I said earlier on, it's really important to to use that 10-year window that people have, in planning ahead in their felling license. Put as many harvesting interventions in as you can, based on the forest that you have, and as I said, use that window, and that's really it. Yeah.
Okay, and I think one here probably, Declan, would be more suitable for you to answer maybe. Multiple owners, for example, 2 brothers, how should they set up the sale?
That depends on whether it's a partnership or not. So it needs to get back to the legality of it first of all. What structure is it? But if we take it, 2 brothers, it is a partnership. At that stage, then they should do it as one operation. Agree VAT will be applicable on the full price, and then they're liable to their own tax on their share of what it is. So it comes back to how it's set up, what each does. Is it 50-50? If there's no agreement there, in the absence of any agreement, it's 50-50. So there needs to be some type of agreement to show, what way it is, but each look at their own situation separately.
Okay, and a question here for John. We saw different sales types there in the video. Which one is the one that you'd recommend, and what are the downsides of the different options?
I'd have to say I wouldn't recommend any one in particular. It depends on your own circumstances. It very much depends on, I suppose, to use that cliche, perspiration equals profit. If you wish to put a lot of effort into it, you can run the sale yourself, you can bring it to the mill gate. On other occasions, you might be looking that you only want to sell it standing. Okay, so it depends on how much effort and time that you want to put into it, or that you want to pay somebody on your behalf to manage it as well. Okay, so clearly the highest price you're going to get is mill gate, but you have to factor in the cost of haulage, the cost of harvesting, and other costs attached to that. So there's horses for courses. It depends on your own situation. What I would say is, the greater your level of knowledge, the greater you're going to accrue out of your crop, both in terms of financially, and I think any other benefits that you're going to get as well. Okay, so the more information you have, getting back to the knowledge transfer groups, the more information you get from a professional forester that you might engage, or that when you engage with a Teagasc forester. So again, all of those things will inform what your situation is, what your objective is. But no, it's impossible to say, well, this is the one you should go with.
Okay, so it depends on circumstances. Absolutely. And approaches or whatever.
Yeah, I think just to come under it, I think it is important for people to get engaged early in their plantation. Get your inspection pads in early, walk your forest, get to know your forest. Take part in the knowledge transfer groups when they do come around, because you learn about your forest, you learn about selling timber, and as John just pointed out and Victor earlier on, you'll learn about the different sale types, and you'll find one then that suits your needs. So
yeah. And Seppi, just a lot of questions coming in here. One here for you, saying that in relation to that, you said an NIS wasn't required, and there's a feeling that DAFM are regularly telling farmers they will be delayed indefinitely unless they provide these nature impact statements. So do you want to just clarify a little bit around that again?
So basically what we're saying now is, don't, as I said previously, don't submit an NIS unless you're requested to do so. What I would say is the people that have submitted NISs to us to date, they will still be prioritised. But what we're just saying is, send in your application, let us review it, because in some cases an NIS mightn't be required, and in other cases maybe the NIS could be very pointed. There might be 1 or 2 issues, and it might reduce the overall cost of the NIS when the landowner has to do it. So that is the take-home message here today, Nuala.
Okay, right, thanks for that. And John, a question in here about certification. Will farmers gain more by having their forests certified? Will they get a better price for their timber? And maybe you might just give us a very short explanation for those who may not know what certification is. Very short. So
certification is essentially like quality assurance. You're showing to the end consumer, the person that's buying timber inside a stockyard or wherever, that it has been economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable manner of management. Okay, so it's hit all those criteria. what it is the end user is looking for it, which means that the mills are looking for it, which means eventually the forest owners are going to have to provide it. The reason they're going to have to provide it is that by 2025, almost half of the timber being harvested every year is going to come from private owners, okay? And at that stage, certification is going to become very important. And it's a means of market access. So farmers may not, or forest owners may not get a higher price for their timber, but they certainly will have an increased market in which to sell that timber into. Otherwise, they're going to limit themselves.
Okay, and just following on from that, we spoke about carbon credits. What about the other non-timber benefits from forests? We are focusing tonight on timber, but just as a question in there in relation to how can you monetize the other benefits that forests deliver?
Certainly, there's a number of different systems in place, I suppose. I'm aware of one farmer that's doing glamping, and he's doing pods inside his forest, and that's a tourism thing. You could have, for example, you could have deer licenses, you could have shooting rights. There's a greater interest in mycology and mushrooms. Again, it's very normal that a lot of the revenue stream in continental Europe actually comes from non-timber products in the woods. As our forests mature and as we do thinning and increase the biodiversity in the understructure, these opportunities are likely to increase as well. So, certainly they're there at the moment, but I think they will increase in time, yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Now we're coming towards the end of the event, and at this stage we might just go back to Tim Reddin, who has some very important take-home messages for us.
If somebody was to ask me about their first thinning, I'd be tempted to say don't do what I did on mine. I think I've learned a lot since then. I think the main thing you need to do is get all of the facts, get as much knowledge as possible. The expression knowledge is power. Talk to forestry companies and get a quote. Get multiple quotes. If you're buying a house, building a house, you're going to go to multiple builders. You want to get all of the information. Look at the quotes you get back and see how much detail is in there. Are you looking at kind of just a net number at the end of the day, or is somebody giving you a breakdown on harvesting costs, the amount of pulp, the amount of sawlog, the amount of pallet you're going to get out there, the tonnage per acre? All of these numbers are important, and you need to understand them. You need to understand them yourself, not just the numbers that the forestry company gives you. So, go out and measure your forests, talk to your Teagasc advisor, get all of the information. I think talk to sawmills as well, find out what prices they're paying. If you're in the market for buying or selling a car or selling cattle, you know what the market is. You need to know what the market is for your timber as well. So, get all of the knowledge and measure your forests.
Tim's journey has definitely been one of learning and development, and he strongly believes that knowledge is power. Hopefully this evening we've helped you to increase your knowledge, and before we finish we might just ask our panel for any take-home messages. Declan.
My take-home message and key point would be to seek tax advice early in the day before it's too late.
Seppi?
Yeah, so Neil, I suppose our take-home message is, when you are applying for your felon licence or your road application, make sure your application has all the information required. Seek advice from a forestry consultant if you're looking to do any of these, harvest plans or biomaps. It's important that all the detail that we require is in it, and that will hopefully ensure that the licence can get through the system as fast as possible.
John?
I would say know what you have, know how you're going to sell, have a plan, stick to the plan, have a written contract.
At this stage I'd like to thank a few people and organisations. Tim and Asta Reddin, Forest Industries Ireland, Declan McEvoy from IFAC, Victor Barber from the Western Forestry Co-op, and Seppi Hona from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and also my Teagasc colleagues, and particularly John Casey, Noel Kennedy, Liam Kelly, Stephen Mayan and Declan McArdle. Thanks to you, our audience. Hopefully you found the event useful, and apologies we didn't get to all your questions, but we will answer them in the coming days. This webinar has been recorded and will be available on YouTube and on our website shortly. You can also visit our website for more information about other upcoming events, and of course you can also contact us directly with any questions you might have. But for now, from all of us here in Teagasc, thank you and good night.